Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 71 of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have a great interview with USA Today bestselling author Patricia McLinn. Patricia is an author who's been in the industry for a long time. She's got almost 30 books out. She started off in traditional publishing and migrated over to indie publishing in about 2010. She has written multiple different series with romance and thriller, and she even has a nonfiction book for writers, a new one called The Survival Kit for Writers Who Don't Write Right, and it's about pantsing and plotting, etc., because she is an author who doesn't outline. So we talk about her writing, we talk about her new book, we talk about her podcast, we talk about so much more. But before that, I'm going to do my personal update, and I'm going to share now a quick word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is the premier way to get your books into the world's broadest distribution to the audiobook market, from the big players like Audible, Kobo Books, Apple, Google, to the library markets and many other audiobook markets around the world. With Findaway Voices, you have full control over distribution choices. You have the ability to take advantage of special all-in promos if you use Findaway to distribute to all the markets. And with the exception of one or two markets that actually control the price for you, such as Audible, which sets its own price, you actually control the price. So you can do discounts, etc., on the books that you promote. Now, I have published books through Findaway Voices for years and find that I'm earning quite a bit of my revenue from the markets that are less traditional or the less known ones and more of the library markets, which is fantastic. If you want to learn more about Findaway Voices, check out starkreflections.ca/findaway. Quite a few updates for personal updates right now, but first I want to mention to this, I know I have listeners outside of Canada, but for any listeners who are in Canada, it is the afternoon of Thursday, April 18th when I'm recording this. And if you're a Canadian author who has books published, whether they're traditionally published or they're self-published, you have until April 30th to register any books that were published in the previous year with the Public Lending Right Commission in Canada, which is run by the Canada Arts Council. You can register new titles that were published in the last year if you have previously registered as a member. If you haven't, you can print out the forms and register, and you can go back as much as 5 years for any books that were published in the last 5 years, and that will include audiobooks, and it will include print books and ebooks that are in the libraries. Now, just if you think that it's a lot of work for nothing, just keep in mind that when Liz and I went to the Dominican Republic earlier this year, it was the check that came in from the Public Lending Right Commission that came in mid-February. It's an annual check that they send. And that check covered my trip to the Dominican Republic, an all-inclusive, all-expensive, all drinks, etc. flight paid. And that came from the public lending rights. Public lending rights exist in Canada. They also exist in countries like the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. I know the terms are a little bit different, so if you happen to be in those countries, please check with your local reference. I'll try to include links in the show notes at starkreflections.ca for the Canadian PLR, as well as the Australian, New Zealand, Great Britain as well. I think I have found links to them, and I'll include those. But do take advantage of that, and the deadline is coming soon. In other updates, I just finished turning in an article I was asked to write for Hamilton magazine. It is an article that is basically going to be out in the summer, and it's meant for tourists who are visiting Hamilton. And it's 8 to 10 quick places that tourists or locals can check out that are the spookiest places in the city. And it was fun, always fun to revisit that from my very first book on the paranormal, which came out in 2012. And it was great to go back to that and talk about some of the fun places, such as the television studio, CHCH, where the hilarious House of Frightenstein was filmed in 1971. And Vincent Price, who appeared in that, there were 130 episodes. They shot the 400 different segments that they used for this show with Vincent Price over the course of 4 days, because he was an expensive Hollywood actor, and they had to bring him into Hamilton, and so there was a limited budget to get it all done in a very short time period for the entire show. They did actually film all of the 130 episodes over, I think it was like a 6 or 9 month period. But again, that building itself wasn't haunted, but that's an interesting spooky fact, because it was a fun, spooky, funny comedy sketch show that was on a long time ago and has a great cult following. I know I watched it, and admittedly I got a little bit scared when I was watching it when I was a kid, even though I did laugh. Also, just yesterday, and yesterday would have been Wednesday, April 17th, after Liz finished work, we drove to Harriston, which is maybe about a 45-minute drive from Waterloo, and it's sort of northeast of Waterloo, to a small town called Harriston, a beautiful town in sort of a very rural area, farmlands, etc. And we met up with the boys from the Paranormal Faction Podcast, Dan, Danny, and John. We had a quick dinner at a local pub there, which was fun. And then we went next door to a haunted theater, an old legacy theater from the 50s. And the owners let us in there because they do a lot of recordings there, because it is allegedly haunted by at least a few different spirits. That a couple of the guys from this podcast are sensitive and have seen a woman walking around. Even saw a photograph that they had captured of a strange shadow person that seemed to look like a woman that was standing in the back of the room. And there was an interesting vibe as we sat in this beautiful old theater and recorded the podcast. They talked to me about haunted hospitals, as well as some of the different books that I've written about the paranormal. Barnaby Bones, My Skeleton, was along for the ride, and I'll of course be sharing links to that episode when it comes out. In other recent news, I recently booked my flight and accommodations for Book Expo America at the end of May. I'll be going down there and meeting up with some of the partners from Draft to Digital, as well as talking to some new partners and people that we want to connect with and do more with. That'll be a fun time. I didn't actually make it to Book Expo America last year, so it was the first year in a long time that I hadn't been there, but I'm looking forward to it. New York is always a beautiful city to visit, and it's always great to connect with so many of the book people that I am in contact with. If you happen to be coming to Book Expo America, give me a ping. I'd love to meet up with you when I am in New York. And the last little bit for personal update is related to the prize that I offered in episode 70. So, interestingly enough, two things happened. I didn't get any comments based on what I had asked you to comment on. This is the interview with Danny Bell and Witten Frank. And it was the audiobook collaborations that they had done, and I was offering to purchase a print copy for a couple of commenters. And interestingly enough, had you been, the only one or two people who commented, you would have both won a book. But I did actually receive a note from somebody last week commenting on an episode that goes probably 3 or 4 episodes back, and they had stated that they often batch listen to several weeks worth of this show, because the content it's not a new show. It's not something where I'm attempting to talk about cutting edge things that are just happening now, although that does come up. It's meant to be more of an evergreen show about the business of writing and the business of publishing. And so, this person who contacted me listens to many, many weekly podcasts that do have news and updates. So what they do with mine is they tend to batch listen to it, and they were upset or sad that they missed out on the chance to comment on a previous prize that I had been giving away. So in light of that, and in light of the fact that it was just a week's time, I am going to be offering folks a chance. I'm going to extend the deadline that I mentioned in episode 70. You've got till the end of April, actually the end of April 30th, 2019, to comment on episode 70. And the two comments I was looking for on episode 70 were related to what book would you most want to escape into, the way that Alana can in Danny's novels, and or you can comment on both. You can comment on what fictional character in movies, television, or books would you most want to save if you had the chance, which is one of the things that she does in the novel. So if you comment on both, you entered twice for getting a chance to win one of two books. I'll be randomly drawing from using random number generation for people who comment on episode 70. And because I'm feeling in a generous mood, I am recently in a book bundle that I think would be appropriate for the audiences here. The book bundle is called The Right Stuff 2019 Spring Package, and it's from StoryBundle. You can get the bundle for $5. You get 4 of the books in the bundle, and for $15 or more, you can get the entire bundle, which is basically more than a dozen books, as well as an online course with Dean Wesley Smith that's actually valued at $50. So for $15, you get all those books plus the course. Why wouldn't you do that? But that's okay. I'm going to be offering an opportunity for listeners to this podcast to win one of these, because there's a gifting option, and I can purchase the bundle as a gift and send that to your email address, so you can download the files to your Kindle, to your Kobo, etc. You can read the full details about the Right Stuff bundle, which was curated by Christine Catherine Rush, at storybundle.com/writing, and that is only going to be available for, as I'm recording this, the next 21 days. So in early May will be when you can't get it anymore. So what I'm going to do is, again with the deadline of April 30th, if you leave a comment on this episode 71, you'll be entered in a draw for an opportunity to win this wonderful bundle. And all you have to comment on for this episode is, let me know what your favorite book on writing is. Because you probably have a favorite book on writing. Maybe one of them is in the bundle already. But this will be an opportunity for you to get great books on both the craft as well as the business of writing from some really amazing people. So that's something you can check out. And again, you can check that out at starkreflections.ca, episode 71, or go check out the Story Bundle at storybundle.com/writing. Well, that's it for the introductory and personal updates for this episode. Let's jump right into the interview with Patricia. Hey, Patricia, thank you so much for joining me here today.
It is my pleasure, Mark, especially since I'm having better weather than you are.
Rub it in, why don't you?
I am.
But that's okay. Spring has arrived. We're all excited.
Finally.
Yeah, and I'm actually excited to talk to you because I'm often proud of how many years I've been in writing and publishing. But you have 3 decades, 30 years or more of experience in writing and publishing. You have more than 50 books, as I'm aware.
I think I'm at 50. I haven't actually counted lately. I think I'm right at 50.
While, right? I'm
not counting like box sets and all that stuff, but individual titles.
Okay, so you've got quite a bit of experience, and I want to go back to, now you had more than 20 years of experience in traditional publishing, and you were published with a publisher, and that kind of started to change around 2010. I want to talk a little bit about that transition now. Who were you publishing with, and what were you writing when you were doing it the traditional route?
When I was traditionally published, most of my books were with then Silhouette, now part of Harlequin. I also did a Harlequin historical, and then I did a book with a small press, and then 2 mysteries with arm of Bell Books, another well-regarded small press. But actually, my move toward indie started earlier, and
Really?
it was at a Novelist Inc. conference in 2007. I was the president at that time, and we got Chris Anderson, the author of The Long Tail,
Yes.
who's now involved. He was then the editor of Wired, and now he's involved with TED Talks.
Yeah.
And we got him to fly down to San Diego to talk to us.
Wow.
And he stood in front of this room of all traditionally published authors, because there wasn't anything else.
Yeah.
And he said, publishing as you know it is dead.
Wow.
And we went, uh-oh. And, I raised my hand and said, what's going to replace it? And he said, look at the music industry. And I thought, whoa, we are really in trouble, because who's going to pay for an author to stand up in front of them for an hour and read their book? We don't have the performance aspect, which is how it is the switch with musicians, where they were being paid for the product that you had at home, and now they're being paid for performance, and we don't have that option. So what the heck were we going to do?
Right.
But because of that, I was more attuned to the possibility of independent. I didn't foresee what it was going to be, but when it started showing up, I went, oh, okay, because of that talk.
So he's like, that's what Chris Anderson was talking about all those years ago.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So actually in 2009, I started an independent website called A Writer's Work.
Okay.
And gathered a few authors, and we were selling our books directly. And the site still exists, but I basically consider it insurance in case the retailers go bonkers on us. More bonkers on us.
So you've been selling direct, 10 years before people said, you should really also sell direct.
Well, I don't know about 10 years, but a few years. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking it's 2019 now. And
now, yes.
10 years ago, you had a website to sell direct.
And I got my rights back to a lot of books.
Did you? So are they? Most of your book rights are back, and then you've re-released them?
Yes. I am down to one book. Harlequin Silhouette still has the German rights to one book, and they're going to re-release it.
Okay.
I don't know why, but okay.
So one of the things that happens to a lot of authors who, like yourself, are hybrid authors that were publishing one way and then also self-publishing, is with the success that you saw in self-publishing, your name became more well-known by the right fans. Therefore, those backlist titles that were probably dwindling sales in traditional publishing may have gotten a boost because somebody read one of your newly released indie books, and then they go back and buy it. So the publisher says, well, we're still selling it. We don't want to give you the rights back. Have you run into that?
I did with the last few books, but I had asked for rights back before there was anything to do with them. Strictly on the theory of, I want these in my hot little hand. They were not reissuing them quickly or widely. And it was, I don't know if I can say pure bloody mindedness. I just wanted them in my hands, and it turned out being really beneficial.
You were very determined.
Yes, I am. I
like one of your villains.
Stubborn.
Now, I want to get into a little bit of what, because you've had such a long experience in traditional publishing, and then obviously a long experience in indie publishing. Is what are the main differences in the two of them that you still sometimes think about and go, oh yeah, it was that way?
Oh, the huge one. This might not surprise people that I say it first, is control.
Okay.
You have control over your destiny, and you have, as an independent author, you don't give up on yourself. You don't say, oh, the sales were down and it's all your fault. Well, you might say that. I take that back. You might say that, but you don't then think it's a reason to not move forward, to not try something different. And the time frame, holy moly, the timeline in traditional, and it's still this way. You send in a book and it's years. You have a proposal in. It can be a year plus before you get an answer, yes or no. And then they say, yes, they want the book. And then it's, you have to write it fast.
Yeah.
But then they sit on it for a year. So that time frame never suited me, never suited my personality. My background's in journalism. And when they talk about deadlines, I think 6 deadlines a night, not,
Right.
not a year later. So that was huge. The other thing that really, sometimes I catch myself is in traditional publishing, so much of the emphasis is on the initial results with a book when it
the
comes
first
out.
90 days, right?
Yep. Oh, 90, and
first 3 weeks.
in Silhouette, they used to say you had 16 days on the shelves.
Wow.
Because a lot of stores would double shelf the series. So they'd give a series on for half a month and then put another series in that physical spot the second half a month.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Harlequin with the constantly rotating stock.
Yep.
Of course, yeah, less than 16 days in some cases.
Yeah. And so it was make or break in those few short weeks. And that might be why I liked Chris Anderson's long tail concept so much, that it had life after.
Right. Wow. So having experienced both worlds and now having the rights back to almost all of your IP, what would make you consider signing a contract with a publisher again? What would the clauses have to be?
Wow. I'd have to retain a lot of rights. There'd have to be a really good reversion clause. So that potentially I could get the rights back. And isn't that interesting? The first thing I think about is getting the rights back.
Oh, because you're still determined about that.
I guess so. It would have to be a lot of money. I'd have to have cover control. They'd have to stick to their timeline. I'd want some guarantees in marketing, in writing, and penalties if they didn't stick to those.
Ooh, penalties. Okay, I like that.
Yeah. What am I forgetting? Higher percentage. That would be nice of the royalties.
No red M&Ms in your dressing room for events, right?
I like red M&Ms.
Just to make sure they're reading every single clause.
That is a good catch. Yeah, catch them. But those would be the big ones.
Okay.
Do you think you would?
I what I would want is to keep my digital rights and have them just have the print rights.
That would be.
That's lovely. What they do best, and that's what we do best. So, I'm only from experience, right? Because I do have, I still sign traditional contracts with some publishers, and I realize that it's for the print book sales because I'm not getting any ebook sales. It's just peanuts that I'm getting in terms of ebook sales. So I would want to sign it. I think to me that would be like the ideal, because as great as we are and we have all these amazing print on demand options, we don't really have much of a way to circumvent the returns of the traditional publishing industry, right? So the publisher becomes the purveyor of risk, and they handle the returns, and they do that better than we ever could. I did it once, and I lost a lot of money accepting returns. It was great when the sale went out, but it was not so good 6 months later when the books came back.
Yes.
So that's one thing I would want in my clauses.
Would you have to put something in there to have the ebook or the digital and the print work together to avoid conflicts or?
Yeah, well, I don't know. So I know, on Kindle directly, if you go into KDP, you can actually click on that checkbox for the matchbook, but that's controlled at the ebook level. So fortunately, they couldn't screw that up the way they do in regular world. I say that because when I was at Kobo, there was a Mondadori, which is Random House in Italy. So Mondadori was the publisher, but they were also the retailer. And they did a buy the print book and you can get the ebook just through the cash register for $1, right? Or $2.99 or some cheap price, because their ebooks were, normally $15 stupid prices that some of the traditional publishers go with. And it was such a huge success because, Kobo needed to get the permission of the publisher and the buy-in of the retailer, because the publisher and the retailer were sister companies, two different arms of Mondadori. It worked dramatically well. Never repeated the experiment, showing that they could have done something that, right now only Amazon has the power. Well, actually, Barnes and Noble has the power to do if they ever, Nook and Barnes and Noble ever spoke to each other.
Yeah.
But it's a great opportunity to do that, and they never did that. So at least with KDP, for example, if my publisher had the print book rights and I had the ebook rights, I could do a matchbook saying, okay, if you bought the print book, then yeah, for 99 cents you can have the ebook. And I think, Amazon's the only storefront I'm aware of that has that opportunity, unless you're using BookFunnel and you're selling your own stuff at a convention, like at what Romantic Times, or if you're selling it for me at a science fiction conference or something like that.
I thought Amazon went the other way, though. If you bought an ebook, you could get the print book for less.
They do the merger, right, where they sometimes take a loss, where they kind of merge it and they bundle it, but then they probably, I don't know how they do that when they bundle products from two different owners. I'm gonna have to check that out. So. But so Patricia, you can tell that you're interviewing people for your podcast, because you immediately turned the tables and you started interviewing me. This is my podcast. I'm interviewing you, so knock it off. But I want to talk about your podcast in a minute, but I want to go back to a story that you share that I think is fascinating. And it's, what does dried wallpaper paste have to do with you starting writing?
Well, I had always wanted to write. I always was interested in it from the time I was a little kid, and I realized that there were people behind these books that I just absorbed and consumed and loved. I thought this is terrific. So there was this kind of running joke with some friends about that I was going to write the Great American Novel, which I pretty quickly realized I didn't want to, because they were pretty darn depressing. But I started trying to write Regency romances, and I wrote, I started at the beginning, and I'd send them off to my sister-in-law, and I'm the youngest by a bunch. So like, she had babysat for me when I was 5 and stuff, and she was dating my brother. And I'd send them off, and she said, "This is great. What happens next?" I said, "I don't know." I have no clue. So she, after several of these, she said, "I'm not reading anything else by you that's not finished." Oh. So I had that. My outlet was cut off, and I would never get past a few chapters. So I moved into this post-World War II house in Arlington, Virginia, that had multiple, like 4 and 5 layers of wallpaper on every wall. Each layer of wallpaper painted over. So wallpaper, paint, wallpaper, paint, wallpaper, right. Paint. And I started chipping it off, because that was the only way to get this stuff off, with a wide bladed putty knife. And I had a story idea. So I would go and I would write whatever I knew, and it wasn't the beginning. I'd just write what I knew. And then when I sort of outran my headlights, I didn't have anything more, I'd go back and I'd chip wallpaper. Well, nothing can stir you to want to write like chipping wallpaper, because it was not the most fun. And you had all this old wallpaper paste turned to dust that was in my hair and all over my skin and in my lungs. And so I go, "Oh yeah, I want to go write." And I would sit down and write. And going back and forth like that, I finished a story, a book. It had international intrigue, a murder, international sports, romance. I did not have any science fiction in it, but that was probably only because I didn't think of that. I threw everything into this book, and it was not very good. And although I still love those characters,
they're still real.
Oh, they absolutely are. And then I send it off totally wrong. I did everything wrong. I sent my favorite chapter. All the things that agents in those days would say, probably still do say, don't do. I did.
Right. Okay.
And I got one, and I sent them off to big publishers. I got out of what was that huge book in the library?
Is it Writer's Digest? The Writer's Market?
The Writer's Market. That's the one. And I got one letter back, which to my consternation, I have lost in a move, apparently. But it was from an editor. It started off and said, "It is clear you know nothing about the publishing industry," and listed the things I did wrong. And then said, "But, you can write." And suggested I look at romance, because she said at that point I'd overplotted for my characters.
Wow.
And that in romance, if you didn't have characters, you didn't have a story. And bless her heart, because most of the people I wrote to either didn't reply, or it was like, what? Go away. So she replied, one other person replied and said, "You should try literary fiction." And I thought, no. Those depress me. Reading the blurbs depress me. Reading the books would really depress me. Spending a year of my life to write one? No. And another person wrote back, and what did they say? They said something about romance too, because I had never really read it. I'd never read too much romance, and I went back and started at the used bookstore and got 20, 30-year-old romances, and gradually worked my way up over about 6 weeks of just constant reading.
Wow.
Worked my way up to the then current. And there was a sea change when Americans started writing, and not just because they were Americans writing, but because the publishers were more open to different kinds of books, where the previous ones were very much the richest man and in the world, and a 18-and-a-half-year-old nanny, and he was mean to her through the whole book until the very end, where he said, "It's because I've loved you from the first second."
Yes.
And when I was reading those, I was thinking, I don't think I can write these. And then there was a sea change, and it was much more people I could identify with, and
Right.
the stories I was really interested in. Jennifer Green wrote one that I can remember reading and thinking, this is what these books can be. And then it was off to the races.
Oh, that's fun. And like that very first manuscript that you turned in, your writing does include multiple genres, right? I mean, you do write in very specific genres, but then you also blend them as well. How many different genres are you writing in right now?
Well, before I answer that, I think what you're saying, Mark, is focus is not one of my strong points.
Or you want to still include all the elements. You just
okay. I like that better, Mark.
Books,
I'll have
right?
to remember that. Well, contemporary romance. I've done some historical romances, and I have this great idea and I've started a historical series, but I have to come back to that. Women's fiction.
Okay.
Mystery that I've started now a pretty cozy mystery series, but my big mystery series is what I would think of as a traditional mystery series. It's not a police procedural. It's not super cozy. There's, if what baking happens in the story is tangential, there's not a whole lot of
That's as
baking.
close to cozy as it gets, right?
Yeah. But it's not real hard-edged either. I mean, there's a serious murder, and it's taken seriously. I had a wonderful review that said that it took life. The characters didn't take themselves seriously, but they took murder seriously.
Okay, cool. Now, is this the Caught Dead in Wyoming series that we're talking about? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I tend to do that too, I think, in romance, where I'm not, a lot of times the extremes get the notice and are easily identifiable. the extreme cozy mysteries, the extreme hard-boiled. In romance, it's the what are they calling them now? They don't call them sweet. They call them wholesome, which I'm thinking mine are wholesome. But so there's wholesome on one end of the spectrum and erotica on the other end. And I'm sort of in the middle because it depends on the characters and you're moving, so.
Now, how many books do you write in a year? Because you have these different series. Are you? I'm curious about your release schedule. How you keep your fans of the different series satisfied?
Not well.
Because you're still getting the rights back to the old books.
Yeah, I wish I wrote faster, but I just don't seem to. Okay. I usually do, 3 to 5 books a year. 5 would be quite a bit.
You're saying 3 to 5 books a year, and yet you're not writing fast enough, you think?
No, because I'll tell you that the characters are piling up in the waiting room in my head.
Okay, so all the stories that have to be written are still...
Okay. Gosh, yes.
You're still scraping them off the wallpaper.
Yeah, that wallpaper dust is still floating through my brain and coming through.
And how do you decide your timelines? How do you dedicate a certain time of the day to write one series, or are there different settings you have to be in, or does it all happen in the same space?
No, I am not consistent in where I write or when I write. I try to write a certain number of words each day. I have to write words, not pages, because I know all the cheats to make the pages seem like
longhand. You use
big looping letters. And no, I don't write longhand either. But I can play with margins, and it has to be words. It has to be words, and that's actually harder on me because I tend to write a lot of dialogue. So. Okay. I'm filling up those pages. But I have a friend who says that we are binge and purge writers. Okay. There's some truth to that. Especially, I tend to do the same number of words and poke along at the beginning. And then deadline is my... Deadline is my savior because oh my gosh, and then I have to I should back up. I write out of sequence. Okay. I'm a total pantser. I write out of sequence. Because of that, I need to do a lot of smoothing and checking and going through all that. When I'm doing that, I need to live inside the book. Okay. And I have to give myself up to the book. Ordinary life just takes a back seat, and the house goes to and everything else falls away, and I resist that. When I'm in it, it's fun, but I resist it because I know when I come out of it, I'm going to have a whole lot of work to do to catch up on real life. So it's a very erratic it's not a schedule, path, I guess.
Right. And so if that's not enough, if 3 to 5 a year and all these different series that you're juggling is not enough, you, a little over a year ago, I believe, you started the Authors Love Readers podcast.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I wanted to hear more authors' voices, and authors who are not often or as often heard as some of the regulars on the podcast circuit. Right. So I thought it was actually inspired. I met a woman at a local authors event, and she was so happy of hearing the authors talk in person and meeting them in person. And she was saying, I wish I could do this all the time. And I thought, I do. I talk to writers all the time, and I like asking questions. So I thought, okay, I will be the surrogate for this woman and readers like her, and sit down and have a conversation with fellow authors and let readers eavesdrop, like we were at the bar and we were talking about, what we do and how we do it and why we do it. So there are about 65 episodes out, I think, right now, 65
Wow.
authors who've been interviewed. And it's a lot of fun.
I can imagine it's a lot of work too, because producing that many episodes of a podcast can be very time consuming. Even and I know you have a virtual assistant who you work with.
Yes.
But that still takes time because you have to do your research, you have to do the discussions, and do you ever get to a point where you're thinking, well, or I could be working on that next story with these characters kicking around in the back of my head?
Well, that's always the difficulty. That is very much the difficulty. Now, unlike you, though, I don't do my own editing. I hand that off to somebody else.
Yeah, because you're smart. I see.
And because I looked at the technology and thought, no, not going to do this. And it is one of those questions of that you always, as you very well know, you always have to ask yourself, is this the best use of my time? And probably 2/3 of the things I do in my life are not. But that's the way it goes sometimes.
Right. No, I love the fact that the way that you approach and talk about writing just seems so, you're honest with yourself. You're like, oh, here's what I do well. Here's what I'm not to do well. But you've recently released, just in March of this year, you recently released a book for writers, your second book for writers, because you did one a number of years ago. But this one is called The Survival Kit for Writers Who Don't Write Right. Love the play on words, of course.
Thank you.
But you talk about pantsing and you talk about things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about that book? Because I think it'd be very interesting for our audience here.
Well, it grew out of a workshop by the same name. And the reason I wrote it as the book is because I'm not really doing too many workshops anymore. And it was always hard to get that workshop accepted by conference organizers. I think people who organize conferences do not operate in the same brain space as pantsers do. And I totally understand it and bless them for organizing conferences and so much appreciate that they do that. But they would look at my proposal and think, well, nobody can operate like this. So why take up a spot in the workshops lineup? But the times I have been able to give it, which is at the Romance Writers of America, one national, and Romance Writers of Australia. And one other time, I can't remember what that was, but each time people have come up to me afterwards with tears in their eyes, saying that they didn't know anybody else wrote like that. And people who were ready to quit felt both the reassurance that they were not alone and some practical tips. So my whole idea with putting this book out was to serve that underserved community of pantsers, because a lot of us as pantsers are also not of the mindset to write books for other writers. You go out and do Google or outline your novel, and how many books and how many methods are out there, and how many you have to do it this ways.
Right.
So this is it's not telling people not to outline, because there are good and valid reasons to outline if you can and want to operate that way. But it is also telling people how to work better with their own process.
Okay.
And hoping to give them hints and tools to do that.
That's cool.
Did that answer your question?
It does. It does.
Okay.
Actually, it's fascinating. And I believe the book is available like pretty much every one of your other books on every major retailer.
It is. I will tell you, your listeners is a secret. It's $2.99. I tried to keep it as low prices as I could at those retailers. But if they come to my ebook store,
okay,
at patriciamclinn.com, and then look for ebook store, it's 99 cents there.
Ooh, you're saving them money too. That's awesome.
Yes, because I want this to get to people that it can benefit. If pantsers are thinking they could use a little boost, or if somebody's thinking they're going to stop writing because they don't write right, please grab it. So that's why it's 99 cents. I'm just trying to cover my costs at this point.
That's really cool. Well, thank you for doing that for writers. So one final question, because you've got such great experience in multiple genres and multiple angles of the publishing industry, is what's one thing that you wish you could have gone back and told yourself when you were first starting out as a writer?
There's too many. They're all juggling. I only have one.
Like the characters in your head, they're fighting for space.
That's absolutely true. I'll tell you, and I say this in the book too, my number one piece of advice to all writers is that writing advice is a buffet. It is not a fixed menu.
That's brilliant.
You get to pick what you want to try, and you may want to go back later and try something different. You may take a taste of something and leave it on your plate. You may think, oh, this is the best thing ever, and get seconds, but you control that. The buffet is laid out there. You control what you take and what you try. And so maybe that also comes into what I would tell myself is not to be intimidated into thinking that other people had the secret.
Right.
And just muddling along with your own ways. And look to improve it as you go along. But
cool.
How you write is how you write, and it's part of I think producing a distinctive and individual voice too.
That is excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you for the excellent advice. Thanks for sharing your time with me today. And let's let listeners know where they can find you online.
www.patriciamclinn.com. And I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, and I'm getting into Instagram, and I'm on Pinterest. And if you see me at all these places, tell me to get back to work because I'm goofing off.
Okay, fair enough. I'll remember that when I see you online. And then
I get to say it back to you too.
Yeah, of course you do. Say, what are you doing? And then the Authors Love Readers podcast. Is that
yes.
What URL is that at? Off your website or?
AuthorsLoveReaders.com.
No, why make it complicated like that?
Yeah. Well, from my website, there are also links, but AuthorsLoveReaders.com is there. And it's on iTunes and all those good places.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Pat, so much.
Oh, it's been lots of fun, Mark. I have a good time talking with you.
I absolutely adored what Patricia had to say about advice and writing advice in particular being like a buffet. You don't have to eat a specifically prescribed menu. It's not, here's the appetizer, here's the main course, here's the dessert. You can go and you can look and you can smell and listen and see what other people are doing, and you can take as much of anything that you want or as little as anything that you want. You can go back for seconds. It is such a brilliant way to look at advice because you're getting advice from all over the place. You're getting advice from me. You're getting my perspective. You're getting advice from different people. You're going to conferences. You're reading books. You're watching what's going on in different groups online. And all of this information is coming into you. But the true power is that, and it comes back to what Patricia likes about self-publishing or indie publishing as opposed to traditional publishing, it's control. You're in control. You're at the steering wheel. You get to decide what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Somebody might like a particular type of food and it works wonderful for them and they're excited, but it causes a gastrointestinal problem for you, so you're not going to do it that way. And that's okay. You can still sit at the buffet together. You can still enjoy a meal together. You don't have to do things the exact same way. You may pick up things from other people that work really, really well for you, and other ones, not so much. That's something I'm going to take with me, and I'm going to remind people of the buffet of advice. I hope that was valuable for you, because it was certainly valuable for me. But that's it for my reflection for this episode. I wanted to take a moment to thank the patrons of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast and remind you that if you're interested in the additional content available for patrons, which include the entire context or the entire text of the 7 Ps of publishing success, you can check that out at patreon.com/starkreflections for as little as $1 a month. And you don't have to be a patron because I'm so excited and glad that this podcast is free for you to listen to. And I do appreciate the fact that you are listening. If you want to support the podcast, Patreon's one way, but another way is just sharing this with a friend. Sharing it with someone that you think is actually going to get value out of it, because you're not only doing them a favor, you're doing me a favor as well, because as the audience continues to grow, that helps with sponsorship, etc., and it keeps me invested in doing this. So I do appreciate the emails and comments that I have received. Just want to remind you, commenting on this episode 71 at starkreflections.ca, and commenting on episode 70 could win you a prize. So it's interactive engagement, which could be very, very exciting, or not. Maybe. We'll see. But in any case, thank you so much for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. Again, this is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Thanks for hanging out with me this week. Until I see you next week in episode 72, here's wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.